So we're here today to obviously look at the contact centre transformation with Your Homes Newcastle and the service improvements they've made with the help of our customer experience team. By way of housekeeping, we'd welcome conversation and we'd welcome questions throughout. So if you look in the bottom hand corner, there's the chat facility. So please do pop your questions in there as they come. And there'll also be a Q&A section at the end as well. So in terms of the session itself, we're looking to make it very conversational amongst our panelists, broadly covering the challenge and background faced at YHN, process and approach we took and have taken, and ultimately the initial outcomes we've achieved and the future strategy and roadmap that we're working on together with YHN. So to introduce the team from Fournet, obviously you've got myself, you've got Ollie and Alan from our CX team who head up the CX team here at Fournet, and of course Rob from YHN, and I'll let Rob do his introductions once we get into the conversation itself. So before I hand over to the team, I'll just give you a quick 5 minutes just to set the scene for those of you perhaps aren't as familiar with Fournet as a business, just to understand kind of how we've come to this point with Your Homes Newcastle. So in terms of, oh, there's our wonderful pictures, we'll skip over those. So in terms of Fournet, we've been in business now for coming up for 20 years, and customer contact solutions, or as we term now, workplace in the middle there, is form the core of our business for the entirety of that period, and underpinned by our secure infrastructure and cybersecurity propositions. And in deploying these solutions to our clients over the years, we've of course always taken a consultative approach to understanding business challenges and the requirements, and how better use of the technology can really help drive those improvements. What we recognised a few years ago, however, is that the extent of our consultancy needed to be wider and deeper to really uncover those operational challenges and where we can assist with our services and technology. So as I say, a couple of years ago, we introduced our customer experience team and our customer experience consultancy practice into the business, obviously headed up by Ollie and Alan, and that team comprises of service design consultants, workforce optimization specialists, AI automation specialists, data scientists, to name but a few. And that team has been working with a number of our clients. Obviously, we're here today to look at YHN and what we've done there, just to understand those operational demands, the current performance based on an assessment of both the quantitative and the qualitative metrics, and then design a transformation roadmap that utilises the most effective technology at the right time, most importantly. In terms of the housing sector, as I say, I head up that within Fournet, and we've been delivering primarily contact centre solutions into the sector for over 8 years now. So we're well positioned to understand the challenges and requirements that are unique to the sector and increasing by the day, as we all know. So on that, very whistle stop, I appreciate, but I will hand over to Ollie and we'll start the conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, Ollie Barron, Customer Experience Director here at Fournet. I think probably the best way to start to have a conversation is for Rob, maybe you to give a bit of background about your relationship to Fournet, Your Homes, how Your Homes and Fournet have worked together in the past, and that might lead us into kind of how we started this project and how it's moved on today.
Yeah, no problem. Hi everyone. So just a little bit of information on Your Homes Newcastle. First of all, we're an arm's length management organisation of Newcastle City Council, and the contact centre provides contact centre services for both NCC and YHN. There are a couple of exceptions, but in the main, the vast majority of telephony contact would come through our contact centre. Fournet we engaged with when we needed to re-procure our telephony system, which was implemented in 2020, and yeah, that's essentially how we were working with them. And we did approach Fournet couple of years ago to investigate a QBuster solution, which was based on some best practice visits we'd done elsewhere, which received some really positive feedback from colleagues, other organisations. And it was around that point where, the Fournet asked us the question, well, what's the problem you're trying to fix? Can we ask why QBuster? And then, the conversations developed.
Perfect, thank you. So I think that segues in to just kind of the work that we started off. Can you give us a bit of an overview of the state of the challenges you were facing and why QBuster? Why did that come about? What was going on?
Yeah, well, post-pandemic, average call handling times were approximately double pre-pandemic, but what surprised us is they didn't really return to a pre-pandemic norm. Volumes were reasonably static, but the complexity of calls, increased customer vulnerabilities, also some technical and process changes as well, which were working against us, essentially led to more demand than what we could effectively service, and that resulted in a significant increase in call wait times. So again, in a pre-COVID world, we never typically struggled to hit our average speed of answer and targets around accessibility, but that was proving more and more difficult, and through any customer satisfaction or through any engagement that senior leaders had with customers or residents of Newcastle City Council, from a political perspective, just typically related to contact centre wait times. So our view was it was challenging to we didn't have the budget to increase resource in line with demand. We were working to try and reduce demand, but nudging customers to an alternative channel isn't something that you can necessarily easily do overnight. So our view was the QBuster might give a better experience while people were queuing. They could at least go about their daily business. So that was the rationale that led us to ask that question.
Yeah, perfect. That makes sense. And then, Alan, I think if I can bring you in on this, introduce yourself, a bit about your background and why, when this challenge was posed to you, the suggestion of procuring the technology necessarily wasn't the answer, and the approach you took at that point.
Yeah, thanks, Holt. Yeah, so a little bit of our background. I suppose I spent 30 years building solutions and running large scale and small scale contact centres around the world, really, primarily in the UK, but positioning things out in other territories as well. So I suppose, like most or nearly all of the consulting team, we're actually practitioners. We're not people flogging pit or flogging consultancy days in terms of what we do. We actually, are obsessed with the outcome. And so when Rob, I suppose, raised it, and I was relatively new to the business when that request was asked for, that we really want to understand the problem. We think how the unique selling point, which is the way we work, is we try and understand the problem better than anyone else, which then, the technology is something that we can pick from a wide raft of solutions to solve that problem when we work. So, the engagement was, I suppose, I was relatively new to the business, as well, most of the team in terms of being new, but Your Homes Newcastle was an existing client, and they obviously had a problem, and we suggested that we would engage in a way to try and help. And the way we thought about doing that, once we understand the problem and thought really QBuster wasn't the answer. The premise of that technology is that it's about mismatches in demand throughout the day, that you can reallocate activities when you've got availability. The contact centre is under pressure, and that availability didn't exist. So we thought, can we go in and run, what we call a diagnostic for a period of days? So including you all, you were there, that 4 or 5 of us turned up. Rob welcomed us in and a facilitator suggested it, but we suggested we'd come in and have a look to work out if we could see the problem at a level of detail and help understand what some of the answers would be. So in that team that turned up was, myself, who's sort of an IT and it's probably data background primarily. Ollie, obviously, you look at CX. We had service designers. We had CX specialists in there as well, and data scientists, data analysts as well, capable of dealing with large amounts of data. It sounds a bit more-handed, doesn't it? But we often acknowledge that when we try and do this type of activity, our clients have got a day job to do. So, having access immediately to rafts of information is something that's sometimes quite difficult for them to do, just to hand over in that sort of official consultancy way. So we'd rather help and be on the ground and turn up and look and understand and try and facilitate getting the information we need while we're there, rather than putting in huge requests, for information. It just becomes a burden, and it makes it harder to solve the problem, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, and being there and going through this process, you welcomed us in, Rob, and that's the first big stage gate, I guess. But from your side, inviting a third party to come in and do this can, I guess, be quite intimidating. To be bringing teams of people in. What were some of your considerations leading up to it before we entered and we opened up with the kind of conversations beforehand? But were there considerations on your side, concerns?
Yeah, I mean, the need for improvement was pretty well established. So we tried various things internally, which had chipped away a little bit to a certain extent, but certainly weren't going to drive the improvements that our customers were looking for. I also had a bit of an advantage. So in a previous life, I used to work in financial services. So I worked for a bank with thousands of FTE, and the resource around planning and analytics was significantly greater than our contact center of 60 FTE, which is to be expected. And we have two really cracking officers who work on our planning and analytics, but you can't really compare that to an organisation that might have 3,000 or 4,000 call handling FTE. So I certainly knew that that side of things could be developed, but there was a bit of risk and a bit of nervousness that internally, the question might be asked, well, is that not what they do? Or can they not, sort that out? Because just talking about improving how we plan, how we analyse, how we utilise our resource better, it's something that we did do. And forgive me, I'll use a football analogy. Those who have worked with me know I'm guilty of doing this. I know not everyone is a football fan, but the way I did genuinely explain this to our director is, I'm sure Preston North End do a good job of looking at nutrition, training, and so on and so forth. But I'm sure Man City do a better job, and it just gave us an opportunity to leverage expertise from sort of where we were, and just take it to a different level, but at speed. Which, to Alan's point earlier, in terms of you've got the day job to do, I guess working with yourselves meant we were able to get that expertise and just move really quickly, and certainly much quicker than we would have been able to do, and possibly at all, due to the just skills within the team.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And going back to your football analogy and picking up on something you mentioned, data sits at the heart of a lot of what goes on in football clubs. The more access you have to data, the more skills you have in the data arena, the more likely you are to be able to be successful in delivering against that. And Al, you mentioned data as part of the diagnostic work that we did. I was always kept arm's length from that for your fear of me deleting the good work you do, or just manually changing things that shouldn't be changed. But I think it'd be good to dive into the data a little bit, not literally into the data, but talking about the strategy, and how the data throughout the diagnostic process was used in informing the transformation strategy. And I know that as we did the diagnostic, there were a number of areas that formulated a roadmap or a transformation strategy that we presented back to you, Rob. But you've talked about resourcing and planning. How did the data side influence selecting the resourcing and planning for Your Homes as far as the kind of Q-Buster was concerned?
I think it helped build the business case, and Alan and the team were really good at walking through what was being proposed and why, and what the impact would be. So the data kind of painted the picture, and helped us, I guess, prioritize as well what had the biggest impact for the ease of implementation.
Yeah.
And I think that's key to this, because and I've certainly been guilty of this sometimes. You'll read a case study, see a webinar about some new fancy tech, whether it's speech analytics or an AI enabled IVR, and no doubt it'll add value, but actually, is there some low hanging fruit that you can tackle before that, which in turn can potentially help fund the business case, or as a minimum improve experience, which helps build credibility to support the business case.
Do you want to pick up on some of that, Al? Because I think you're pretty key in this.
I think it's a good point, isn't it, Rob makes? I think that probably a lot of people on the call sat there thinking at the moment, you know, I'm sure you can't get through a day without, and we talk about generative AI, chat GPT, AI in general, and thinking about, you know, the wonders of the tech. And there's lots of people very keen to tell you all the things, you know, that it's the answer to every problem. And invariably, it's the answer to some problems. Whether it's the answer to your individual problems is the answer is probably in data analysis in reality. So I think, you know, at our stance, and you know, at the start of my career, I worked for, you know, a hugely impressive man, Simon Wilson, who's the chief executive of Next. If you don't recognise the name, he's been around the longest serving, the youngest ever, the longest serving chief exec of a hugely successful business. And you know, he said something to me that sort of anchored the way that, you know, I like to think about these problems. Is that the danger is very often people make decisions on things that are anecdotally true but empirically false. And actually, you know, to understand, you know, people hear the stories, don't you, in contact centres, they live on the stories very often, that we get a lot of calls about something, or and that can drive a decision. What we're really keen to do is absolutely anecdotes around contact centres. We want to hear them, and part of our approach is spending time with agents and team leaders and listening to calls, and not just looking at data, but immersing ourselves in the process and the interactions and that customer journey. At the same time, we want to see what we see and what we hear from people in terms of the anecdotes and the things we, you know, when we're there for even, you know, a few of us for a few days, we'll see certain things. We want to make sure that actually substantively matches to the data. So we get to this perfect world where we can see things that are anecdotally true. You know, we can understand what people are seeing, feeling about it, but we're matching it almost that left and right brain to the data. So, and it's empirically true as well. And that just means as a starting point that we don't really discuss technology, which is a bit odd, right, from a company that sells technology. We want to understand the problem better than anybody else. We want to understand sort of the, you know, the heart and the brain, the emotion and the data better than everybody else, and match the two together. And once we've done that, it allows us to, you know, work with people like Rob to do, you know, highly predictive what if scenarios, and actually understand the impact of different technologies on those problems, and be able to scale, size, and ultimately, you know, throw technologies away. At the start of this process, you know, Cubus was a technology we sort of put on the back burner. I think where we've got to, and we'll cover that later, it's probably something, maybe something that's applicable very soon, the way that the contact centre is now running. But then we use the data to prioritise the actions. A bit to your question, we use it to understand the size and scale of different interventions, and then we try and put them in an order that's logical. And that order really is, you know, very often we understand people, if it involves spending money, doesn't always spending money on technology, but if it involves spending money on technology, can we put the technology in an order that each subsequent deployment of the technology delivers such a benefit that it pays for itself, and then it pays for the next technology as well. So we create a roadmap using the data, which is very logical and driven by data, that and we can move those things around. They're not mutually exclusive, but we can work with clients on a roadmap that gets their objectives, knowing that it's bite-sized chunks that we can run at very quickly that deliver benefits, you know, not necessarily immediately, but in an incredibly short space of time. That means we have the confidence to move to the next step. So we do that through, like we said, understanding the journeys, understanding, you know, the stakeholders, the customers, and the contact centre advisors, agents, whatever you call them, your business colleagues, are really important. And that we spend time with those, listening to those, and we can model things out to start thinking about a roadmap that is sequenced in a way that gives a maximum impact and benefit to our clients and their customers.
I follow on and kind of build on that. It's both of you really, both you and Rob. Workforce planning is clearly vital in managing an operation in contact centres and customer service in that space. Can we outline the methodologies that you and the team applied to this, Al, and how they've improved upon what Rob was doing previously? And I guess the bolt-on for you, Rob, is you were planning before, right? It's not like you weren't, and not like the operation wasn't being planned. It was. How have you adopted the change, and how have you seen that change come through? And what was your mindset as the proposal was given to you that this is something that we would like to support you with?
So is that, you would like me to go first, Ol, just about?
Yes, yeah, either or.
Yeah. So I think first thing to say is that the team are planning, the team, are a really great team, and they are experts what they do, and they are experts in running in terms of a contact centre for a housing association and council, which is, is an area of expertise. I suppose we have as a team is, we've run in BPO and in private sector, big estates of people in lots of different scenarios across, I looked after in terms of planning teams for 30,000 FTE. And what that means, I suppose, is we've got lots of scars on our backs of things we've done badly because we're looking after, hundreds of clients at once, potentially, or environments at once, and we get to, learn from our clients. So we've just got different experiences in terms of the teams, but the approach generally we come in is, and I wonder if this will raise any questions or observations for people listening, is that the first question we ask is, can you count all the work that you do in your contact centre that your people have to do? It's quite easy to count things on telephony, isn't it? And we get stats out of telephone reports and things, but can you count it? And invariably, you've got complex environments in housing association, handoffs and lots of third parties, and your repair teams and other type of teams that you're dealing with in third parties. So some of that work sometimes can fall between the cracks. The second thing is we look at is, can you time that work as well? AHTs are a wonderful metric that actually only workforce planners and accountants are bothered about. Nobody else actually really experiences an AHT. Agents are more bothered about things, things it doesn't measure, like gaps between calls, and obviously customers don't see what wrap time feels like in a contact centre. They don't experience that. They're more like wait time. But that AHT is important in working out how many people you need. So can you count it? Can you time it? And the third bit is actually, is your work organised in a logical way that makes it as efficient and effective as possible? How good are you turning the hours that you pay for into actual work? That sort of work to pay ratio. We have benchmarks around that and lots of experience. We know what world class looks like, and we know what not so good looks like. So they're the three things that say: can you count it all? Can you time it all? And can you organise it in a way that makes it efficient and effective? And that involves challenging sometimes the way the operations set up, because 24/7 things start to make front and back office and different channels sometimes are organised very logically, but there may be a better way to make it more efficient and deliver a better customer experience for the amount of money you're spending. So they're the three principles we use. And when there's gaps, we look to fill those gaps in, and then we build a model that we can talk to people like Rob and get his understanding about. And sometimes, what looks great on paper and just numbers, there are reasons why that can't happen. Segregation of duties, the way that maybe even some of these pay scales might work that say there's an impact on that. So, there has to be some constraints placed on that thinking by the business, and then we can work within those constraints to, get to the best possible answer that then becomes a proposal. Go, if we did it like this, if we organised it like this, if we set the skills up on the telephony in a slightly different way, then we'd get a more efficient outcome. And we can predict what that was very accurately by using the data and by modelling that out and creating scenarios for people.
Perfect, thank you. And the bolt-on question, Rob, I guess is vast experience, Alan, the team, but that's not taking away from the work you already do and were doing and have been successful in doing. But there could be concerns of feeling exposed or being uncovered for something that isn't something. From your perspective, having received the insights and the information that Alan and the team pulled together, it'd be useful to get a kind of bit of context from you about your taking of it and then adding that to your strategy and going forwards with it.
Yeah, and there is always a risk when someone comes in and proposes a different way of doing something that's either not well received or that someone thinks, "Oh, why didn't you think of that?" But in all honesty, everyone was so motivated to improve outcomes. no one was really precious that the idea may have come from somewhere else. And some of the improvements that were made, so getting the data out of the system, we used to have someone spend in the hours per day copy and pasting. So we've got a lot of lines across the housing organisation and the council. Just being able to automate that, which is something we had explored with our internal guys, and just not used to working with the Veya and in the detailer system weren't able to do that. I think that was done in a week or so, and that saved hours a day, which we can then use that time productively to do something else, and also stuff that's a bit more engaging than copy and pasting. Yeah. So whereas there is a risk that people may have found that a threat, or someone could have said, well, why have we not thought of that? You just have to be honest. I just used my example before. The guys have some expertise in areas that we didn't. We're focused on improving outcomes. We're able to leverage it at speed, and certainly from a stakeholder perspective, everything's exceeded expectations. So that hasn't really been a risk that's come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely, and and I know that we're not going into the detail of the outcomes on this call, and that's understandable, but it's clear, and we know that there were significant improvements that have been delivered off the back of doing this. It'd be useful to understand a bit about how these changes have enhanced employee and hopefully ultimately tenant satisfaction. And from your side, Rob, what are you seeing your side as far as the metrics that matter?
There's been a significant reduction in the average speed of answer, which I don't mind sharing. We do this at many industry events, so some colleagues at other organisations will have heard these stats before. But November was a low point, but that was around 14 minutes. Towards the back end of April, that for a week was 3 minutes, and we've got days where it's less than a minute, and that's continuously improving. So we don't really intend to keep driving it to a pre-COVID level where we might be in the sort of 20 to 30 seconds average speed of answer, but certainly anywhere that's around a minute, 2 minutes, we'd be happy with. It's great to talk about numbers because that's a measure of experience and people will get that, but I think the human comments sometimes bring it to life a little bit more. One of our CSAs said, Rob, I think there's a problem with the lines. I said, why, what's up? He said, I've had some gaps in between calls today. Well, you're supposed to have a little bit of a gap in between call from time to time. We're not meant to have 15 and 20 calls and more continuously queuing with absolutely zero idle. And just to share a stat on that, there are some agents on some lines that were having less than 1% idle time over a month, which isn't sustainable. So while a lot of the planning stuff has helped, there's also a bit of a knock-on effect. So whilst it's difficult to attribute this entirely to this because we were doing some other stuff as well, but sickness has halved over the past few months. Absolutely no doubt this has played a part in that. Absolutely no doubt that some of the other stuff we were doing has played a part in as well. And I'm not too worried about trying to distinguish what's driven what. The fact that we've had such significant improvements is what matters. And from a customer perspective, we do a CSAT survey on the back of a call. It's been a long time since we've had positive customer comments to say how quick and easy it was to get through. We usually do really well on sort of empathy and the soft skills of the guys, but any survey is usually tagged with a line at the end saying, yeah, such a body was lovely, but it took far too long to get through. We still have a little bit around the edges where we've got some outliers that we want to keep chipping away at, but certainly the breadth across the board, and that feeds into overall satisfaction as well, which over a similar timeframes jumps by about 4 or 5 percentage points, because you could look at repairs, you could look at any service across the organisation, and within their complaints or any CSAT data, they'd be talking about the repair or talking about their experience with the housing officer, whether good or bad, and then stick on the end, but it took too long to get through to the contact centre. So it's certainly from an outcome perspective, couldn't really have asked for more, and it's certainly exceeded expectations, both internal and external customers.
Yeah, really good feedback. Thank you. Yeah, and then I guess from your side, Al, leading into this, there's a load of data analysis that was carried out, and you plotted the potential benefit for Rob and the team. How's it matched up to your expectations leading into the transformation?
Yeah, I think what we think. No, I would say the first thing is matching up. I think what really has exceeded expectations is the partnership. So I don't think I'd want to think, I'm, very keen to. I'm as keen as Rob every morning to see the numbers and performance. I'm sure as he is. Maybe not as keen, maybe, but it's the first number I want to look at in the morning to see how we're doing. And I think what's really, been really good is that. And I think this is on both parties. In terms of how Rob and the team have welcomed us in, is that it's an absolute partnership. We're in this together, and that being together and wanting to drive the right outcome together is the thing that is actually far exceeds my expectations. I think in terms of the delivery of the numbers, it's been great. It's been a superb delivery. I think we probably are very prudent in our views of what's achievable, because it's very easy to go and say. So I think we knew it would be better than the initial discussions with Rob, because we wanted to not expose anybody and Rob to be comfortable with telling his business what we deliver would be delivered. And obviously we've exceeded that. But I think it's got to a point probably that we didn't, considerably better than we probably thought the end state would be by now. I think we're sort of 10 weeks in from making changes, and and it's been a very quite a short sprint time in terms of the work and how quickly it has delivered. So the pace of things is the thing that's probably surprised me the most. The scale, I think we undercalled it a little bit because we wanted to be safe and actually over deliver. And that's not a game on our behalf. We just wanted to make sure that we did what we said we would do. And actually, the maths when you have, I don't know if any of you guys are trying to do this on the call, but when you have some hard sums involved of calls abandoning, the customers retrying and getting the sort of spin sometimes the abandonment rate, the maths of unraveling that spin is quite complicated and hard to predict, because you don't know if they've gone to another channel, you don't know if they're going to come back, you don't know if they've rung off another phone. So actually, how quickly it unravels, and queuing theory is a really weird bit of maths, but actually, when you get close to it, the benefits really accelerate quickly, and you can't get your head in it. And the best way of thinking about it, it's the same maths that when you get to a holiday period, you go, the roads are really quiet. It's the same maths in queuing theory that says, well, actually, in the summer holidays, there's only 10% less cars on the road. So suddenly, as we started to answer more calls, and we're answering nearly double the amount of calls with a similar amount of staff that we were, that the benefits of the retry and speak about just accelerate really quickly. So it's quite hard to predict. So we weren't gaming it. We were just, let's say, limiting our ability to predict what that impact would be, as anybody would be. It's massively complicated, that process. So, but the partnership far exceeded it. The pace, next level down, you definitely exceeded it, and the scale, it exceeded what we initially thought. Yeah, in terms of how it worked.
So Rob's put a question in the chat, which is perfect for this point. So, and I guess it's to both of you, and we'll use it as a kind of two-part question. There's two in there, but they kind of ask the similar things. What were the easiest things to change to seek improvement, and what were the hardest or more costly? And the second part to that is, were there any proposed changes that you didn't or couldn't implement?
Yeah,
either of you can pick up.
I think the way we oftentimes think about this stuff is every case is different. But when we looked at the case, the easiest and quickest was some things about routing and skilling of agent, the way that was configured. And I'll use an analogy now. I suppose that in making those decisions, there's very few people involved to make that decision. You can make that with a handful of people that you're going to configure your skills based on your ACD a little bit differently, or your route calls a bit differently. It's a handful of people that can make that decision. And that was one set of benefits. The next, that was almost immediate, like that. We got a reduction of about 300 seconds overnight by changing their skill routings. So that was just in the maths we could see. The next bit, I think, is things that involve getting the agents to do something differently, or your team leaders, team managers to do something different, the way they manage the contact centre, how they maybe look at data, how they drive performance throughout the day. And that involves changing the behaviour of quite a lot of people, right? Depending on how big your contact centre is, 30, 40, 50, 60, hundreds of people maybe. And that's going to take longer, because that's a change in getting everybody on board and doing it. And And that was the next bit, sort of the next phase of things that delivered even more benefit than the first phase. But then, we started, it was quick, but it took a bit more time. And then the final set of things, it become really difficult. I think when you think about these transformation programs, or trying to think about, we're not at that stage here, is how do you start getting your customers, your tenants, to do something different? In that instance, in Rob's instance, 250, 300,000 people that you're trying to influence. So those things we've not done yet. So starting to introduce new channels like conversational AI, those things are really hard and need time to think about and less predictable on what they'll do. Potentially bigger benefit if you can shift them, but you're talking about retraining 250,000 customers who you've trained for maybe 20 years to interact in a certain way with you. So just if you build it, they will come. Just because I've turned, conversational AI, web chat, other skills, doesn't mean it's going to affect the change. So we're starting at the bottom end in terms of thinking about what could do quickly and what would was quite easy to influence and materialize benefits quickly. And thinking about how we would go up that chain, we're probably closing that phase off now and starting to think about other things we could do, which is sort of in between the customers doing something differently, which is the customers still interact with us through the same channel, but we might add other things in terms of automation in terms of real-time speech analytics to wrap the calls at the end and feed CRMs and housing management systems automatically, or indeed putting in incredibly impressive AI-driven conversational AI IVR. So the customer's still ringing us and it's still interacting the same way. We're not asking the customer something different. We're thinking about technologies that can do something clever and do something more efficiently when they come in. So those sort of 3 or 4 stages going up, up to the hard bit of getting customers to do something different. It's sort of our sort of thinking in our mind and where we structure things on.
Yes, I think for absolute clarity, there has been no technology used to date in the work that we've done. I think that's important to understand. This has been done through process re-engineering and workforce optimization. It's not workforce management technology, albeit it feeds in, and then the next phase is enabling us to kind of use that technology. But I guess for you, Rob, what parts of this have been harder? And are there any elements of it that you haven't been able to or cannot implement?
There's nothing that I'd probably put in the hard box because it's taken some work. Obviously, had a bit of effort put into build the business case and get support for that in advance and position it. I guess that was probably the hardest bit. But then once you're over that milestone, I think Alan described it really well before, where he said it's a true partnership, and you do get that. I believe him when he says it's the first number, because you'll get a ping and say fantastic below a minute yesterday, and you absolutely do get that feel that it is a true partnership. In terms of the stuff we've then done after that, it's taken a bit of work, but because it's the way it's structured, and I guess it's gained credibility quickly through delivering the quick wins, everyone's been really keen to engage with the next bit of the process. And then, I guess the only thing I suppose didn't or couldn't implement, I guess, is the queue buster, because that was actually the original request, but for the right reason. We're actually at a point now where we could probably engage with queue buster, because we do have some pockets of idle where you might say, well, actually, maybe we could shift some calls from that time to later in the day. And then the next phase, I guess, is to look at those more perhaps complex and more transformational sort of big ticket items, which people no doubt have heard a lot about, like you can't put the telly on without hearing about AI in some context or other. So we're no different, looking at AI enabled IVRs, potentially speech analytics, which can take the rap, for example, out of the call and populate the notes without the agent having to type them at the end of the call. All those kind of it's a good question from Sharon. We didn't explain what QBuster was at the start of the call. Always dangerous to assume these things. It's essentially, I guess I'll Alan, correct me if we can do a better explanation, but it gives a customer the option not to queue, and then when they get to the front of the queue or later in the day, they can receive an outbound call back, but it then creates an extra queue for you to manage. So if you've got some idle time to deal with that, great. But if not, then you'll probably find it's just an extra level of complexity that doesn't really add any value.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation of exactly what it is. So the last question I had really before we go to a kind of Q&A, if anyone has any additional questions to drop in, is you've I think you've pretty much gone through it now, Rob. How are these transformations aligning with your home's more strategic goals? And has it helped you enhance the other elements that you may have been considering as far as transformation are concerned, and expedited some of that?
Yeah, I mean, our purpose is to make living easier for customers, and if they can't get through to the contact centre, then that's not making living easier. It in turn has a knock-on effect on all other services because we're typically the first point of contact. So in terms of overall satisfaction, links to regulatory objectives, which will be important for everyone on the call. It's got a massive impact, and it's one of those things. Obviously, customer service is much more holistic than how quickly you answer the phone. Absolutely, but we typically don't get many complaints around staff attitude and things like that. Of course, you get one from time to time. But the feedback from customers was very much it takes too long to get through to the contact centre. So, that based on customer insight was very much our focus. We're certainly out of the stage where that's like a significant blocker. Like I say, there's a couple of outliers where we may have a bottleneck. Certainly out of hours, because our contact centre is 24/7. So if you do have like an unforeseen emergency, then that sometimes can be difficult to deal with. But it's much more now looking at, well, how do we improve the experience further through working with the business, improving repairs processes, enabling self-serve, and embracing those new technologies.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. So, I mean, I've got nothing else to ask. I mean, any closing remarks from you, Al, before we hand over to James? I think we are going to keep the Q&A open until we close the call. If we can't answer it on the call, we'll try and get it across to you some other way. But any closing remarks from you, Al?
I think we did some benchmarking recently, actually, and the most up-to-date sort of industry benchmarking report was that, and the nearest fit was local authorities, which had a sort of an average speed of answer. The people on the call might want to ping in what their target is, or maybe their target, or maybe what they're running at in terms of the chat, so we can see. But as we evolve, but there should be the average in the UK, as measured by a Microsoft survey at the end of 2023, was 240 seconds. In terms of for local authorities, which obviously there's sort of overlap here in terms of what we're doing with the housing element, and we're well under that number now, so we're way better than average, probably heading towards under half of that number potentially in terms of the direction of travel we've got in the next couple of weeks. We know that from an efficiency point of view now, in terms of the benchmarking, certainly the operations that I've looked after run in the past, even the big scale ones that benefit from it, the ratio of efficiency that Your Homes are now is in that sort of world class bracket, certainly best practice to world class in terms of what's happening. That so the element of the maths say that that's as good as it can be, given the way the maths works in terms of contact centres. So what we know is we've got a really, really efficient machine now that we've worked on delivering. That any technology deployed will have the maximum impact on now. But also on the other side of it, that we're not potentially suggesting or thinking about technologies to work with Rob and the team on that won't have an impact. We've got a robust and proven data model and understanding of the business, so a highly efficient and predictive model and a highly predictive operation. That means that I think we're in a really strong place to work on the next bits of technology roadmaps. And we've got to that point. It's been quite a long relationship because there's lots happening in the hiatus from we're doing the diagnostics when we kicked off the work, Rob, in sort of January, when we arrived at the end of January. But those benefits have been delivered really quickly. 10 to 12 weeks on from actually kicking off on the engagement. So what's really exciting is we've got there really quickly, and actually where we could get to, you know, potentially in the next few months before the sort of the winter peaks start to drop in again. With, you know, although you wouldn't think of the weather at the moment, that we're not in winter, but anyway, before we get storms, and I know people have had storms recently and over the weekend, and we get some of the, you know, the uplifting, people turning boilers on in October and all the things that go with that in terms of surge in demand. So it's been, you know, got to a really good place that, you know, I'm really proud of in terms of working with Rob and the teams in a partnership. But what is really exciting is, you know, where we go next and what the possible is, because as you said, we've worked on best practice and reporting and optimization of the contact centre as it stands today. Actually, the next phase gets into some of the, you know, I suppose maybe gets excited about the tech and actually starting to do things, you know, potentially in a fundamentally different way. So it's, you know, I think, you know, the next phase is going to be equally as exciting as what we've done in the last, you know, in the last 10 weeks or so.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's it from me. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your openness, transparency in the conversation. It's been great. Long may it continue. But for now, James, we'll hand back to you.